Welcome, team, to another episode of Fight the Burnout. Today we have a very special guest, Janet. She is calling in from Canada. She was a dispatcher over there for many, many years. And now she is a visionary coach helping people after they've gone through and come out the other side from PTSD and, everything that goes with that as we talk about. She went through it herself, so she knows, just like myself, what it's all about. And her husband is actually ex-police officer as well. He was a police officer, I believe it was for like 40 years, but she'll tell us in a second. As usual, I'm going to let Janet take it over, tell us about herself, who she is, what she does, and a bit about her backstory. Why don't you take it away? And again, thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Backstory is when I got married, my husband was a security guard. I have seen them. They're famous for their red serge and the musical ride. So if anybody's seen them, he doesn't have a horse. Our kids have horses, but he doesn't have one. Anyways, he did 28 years as a police officer, and we were married for about 7 years before I fell into the job as started with doing relief for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and then went into dispatching and retired in 2011. And then have been for the, since then has been doing relief in the Canadian North as a relief dispatcher. And it's interesting, I'll just give, because there might be some spouses listening to, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, so we call them the RCMP, they can be posted in really, really small places as well as in cities, but we don't normally police the cities. We're usually contracted to provinces and to places to do that. But as a spouse, I am cleared, which I found out that in small communities, the spouses can be commandeered into doing things that they never would have dreamed of doing.
Wow.
So my husband, we got posted to, it's called Haida Guy now, the Queen Charlotte Islands when we were there, a very small community. And we'd only been there a few months, and I get a phone call from one of the officers, and I said, just a minute, I'll go get Les. And they said, no, we want to talk to you. We'll be there in 10 minutes to pick you up. You have to guard. I said, what? I have to, what? Yeah, we have a female prisoner and you're cleared and we're coming to get you to guard. So I looked at Les and I said, like, what do I do? Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So anyways, he shows me how I should pat her down. And they didn't do, we didn't have to do strip searches or anything like that. But so I get in there and there's this very petite, very pretty, Aboriginal woman, Haida, it's a Haida nation there. And I started to pat her down. She said, not like that, like this. So she showed me what I was supposed to do. So that's a little bit of a funny story, but my journey, Les got transferred around. So we moved and I would be transferred. I wouldn't necessarily be transferred, but then I would part-time, right? I would use as a casual. But in 2002, we were in a bad car accident. And I ended up off of work for a year. Lots happened. I always say, like, if people are saying, oh no, well, it was the 4th car accident in 10 years. But it literally saved my life. They found medical issues that I had that I didn't know I had. But they also, I went through a really dark period and knew I needed help. So I was sent to a psychologist, and I cannot stress this enough. If you do not feel comfortable with the person you're with, do not stay with them. I tell you, this first psychologist I saw, I wouldn't pay anybody to go see her. And so I went in search of my own.
Yeah. And
I thought everything that was happening to me was because of the car accident. But I knew one night that when I found myself crying in the middle of the night by myself in the living room, wishing I died in that car accident, I knew something was wrong. And anybody, and I had health issues for years. And that's another thing. You know what? Our bodies know before we know. So, pay attention to what your body is doing. But I was blessed to find a very, very good psychologist and worked very well with her. She gave me amazing tools. And then she said one day, she said, you don't have to work with me anymore. And I went, oh my God, now what? Like, this person was my savior. Like, she was my grounding. She was, and, but like anything else, things come to an end. And if you have a really, really, really good therapist, they will help you get to that point. Yeah. But what I found is that, and that was in 2003, I was diagnosed in January 2003. But what I found was that there was nothing for us when we were done from that. There's nothing to take us forward. And I think, Chris, you found that a little bit by working with your fitness and that we all need a purpose, right? And so my journey started doing personal development and stuff like that. And in 2010, I found Jack Canfield. He's the Chicken Soup for the Soul co-author, if no one knows who that is. He wrote a book called The Success Principles. And I have a cousin in Seattle, and this is like dial-up time, right? 2010 is still dial-up, right? And for some reason, he popped up on my screen of the computer I was on. And so I ended up going to his one-day event in Seattle. And from there, it's the history. I trained with him. I got he wrote the Success Principles, and I'm certified in the Success Principles trainer. But it was like my journey. I went on my journey, but I found that there's so many people, I think, that you can go backwards. Like, if you don't fill that void with something going forward, you tend to going back. And I've seen so many people not heal and not move forward because they haven't found what they need. That's what was my driving thing. I was surrounded with more positive people, and so that's where I started going, and just sort of built from Jack's work, and did more. Like I think you've done the NLP too. You did with Tony Robbins. I did it with someone here in Canada, and it's just knowledge. I'm not a therapist, but boy, I've been there, and you know what? We all have a purpose. Your story is just as important as the next person's story.
Yeah. I love that. It's so important. There are a few things in there that I just want to reiterate just for listeners in case they didn't catch it. One was, if you don't click with your therapist or psychologist or counselor or coach, get a different one, because that is so important. I had multiple counselors during my journey, during my time in the police, and some of them, looking back, I'm like, why did I stay there? Mm-hmm. But again, if you don't feel like you're getting, the results that you are looking for, find a different one, or talk to the therapist about why you feel like you're not getting it. And if they can't help you, then, if they're a good therapist, they will tell you to go find somebody else as well. I remember having one tell me, if you don't feel like I'm the right one for you, tell me and we'll find you a different person. And then the other thing is it is a journey. Just because you've been signed off okay doesn't mean that those little voices in your head go away. As I call it the demon. It just came to me on my motorcycle trip, as we've talked about in the past. My motorcycle trip, I was like, it's like a little freaking demon. He just won't go away in my head. And I was always trying to push him away. And it's about actually using him to do it. And that, that's where having coaches like yourself, Janet, and, myself, is to help guide you through that. Question for you, Janet, is obviously because, here on the show, we talk a lot about burnout. And my philosophy and my thinking is that burnout actually can cause PTSD to happen a lot easier. Those traumatic things that we constantly see, and that if we're burned out in a drained, negative state already, then we can, we're more prone to it, I feel. First off, what's your definition? What would be your definition of burnout if you think about burnout?
I think that happened to me in 1988.
Yeah.
And you have to put things in perspective. I think it's working shift work, being overtired. For me, looking back, probably the start of the PTSD. Like if I would have had some help there, we had a police officer that I was very close to commit suicide uh, before that. And I think and then I had health issues. I had two young kids. Well, they were early teens then, and it just got too much. And I quit uh, after 6 years in, and went back to school, and then just worked casual at my hours so that I could do. So I would say that was really the start of it. And anybody that looks back, I'm sure, Chris, if you look back, you'll know the signs were all there. And if more people were trained to recognize the signs, I know in the policing industry that they don't want to look at that. Like when I was diagnosed with it in 2003, my psychologist, she says, this has nothing to do with the car accident. This has everything to do with your job. They weren't even talking about it in 2003. Never mind a dispatcher getting it.
Yeah.
You know, and, but her tools that she gave me, I've used them and used them. And more recently, I went through a protocol that I know somebody takes people through, and I scored very low on it for the PTSD. But there doesn't mean that there's not triggers. There's some things that'll happen. But what I really think, and just tell me if you think so too, for me, everything that came up in my treatment and that, all the stories and stuff, I can deal with any emergency. I can deal with shootings. I can deal with any emergency. As soon as it involves something that has a personal connection, like when Dennis committed suicide, I knew I had talked to him 6 months before. He'd been on a bad call, and him and I talked about it. And he had said to me, he says, I can't rationalize this one in my head. And it was a murder suicide involving a child. And you know, when we look back, we can find gifts. You know, although he's gone, he gave me a really, really good gift, because the man who introduced my husband and I shot himself 3 days before our wedding at my mother-in-law's house. Wow. So why Dennis talking to me that one day and sharing what he did, I went back to that time before our wedding and thinking, yeah, that makes sense, that there was something happening in Henry's life that he couldn't rationalize in his head. Like, and when we get into that state, and I'm sure you've found that too, I've taken lots of calls for suicidal people, right? You can't talk a suicide down if they've made up their mind. No. So that, and anything to do with children, like I had 3 grandchildren living with us when I took a call from a girl who's probably the same age as my granddaughter, that her mom was being beat up. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. All I could think about is this poor girl. And all I could do is send the police to her, but I couldn't be there to comfort her. I couldn't be there in her classroom the next day when her teacher's probably yelling at her because she's not paying attention. It's stuff like that that sticks. And I'm sure that's, you know, we can deal with emergencies. Like people say, how can you deal with it? If I'm not emotionally attached to the event, I can deal with it.
I think you have a very good point there, and this is a really good conversation. You know, dispatcher, ex-dispatcher, ex-cop, because it's very true. You know, as a cop, like even when it comes to my wife, even like me personally, I don't know if it's a guy thing or what, but I switch, and when traumatic things are happening, or as I call it, shit hitting the fan, I switch into, my wife calls it that cop mode. She's like, you change and you're just there. Like my wife has had things like medical things, like had a thing happen when we were overseas one time, and she's sitting there like freaking out, you know, all this stuff. And I'm just dead straight calm. Like literally because I just get laser focused. And I think that is a trait of first responders, in that we get really good at that. It's the after facts. that is the problem that I feel most first responders struggle with. We don't reflect on things enough and actually go, wait a second, my wife just had this going on. I went into cop mode, as she calls it, and just went straight, okay, cool, let's figure this out, let's make it happen. And then afterwards just went, oh, not with nothing. Instead of going, how did that actually make me feel? You know,
Well,
same thing when you go suicide. It's like,
yeah, we compartmentalize things, right? And so I'll take on the role as the spouse now. This is before I ever worked with a force. I got a phone call from my husband one time. He's at work and he says to me, do you know so-and-so? And I says, no, but I know his wife. And I said, why? And he says, oh, he was just killed tonight. Okay, bye. And I'm like, what did you? Now I can't sleep. Now I'm like this. But like you say, you go into that mode. So then as a dispatcher, something else that happened, and I totally get that, is that my daughter was at a horse show and I was in the arena waiting for her to come in. And then somebody came running to get me. She'd been kicked under the chin by her horse. And so she's laying there, and my husband didn't see it happen, but he saw the horse loose and he went and touched, and his hands came away with blood, and panicking, and we're getting the ambulance and that. So they get her on this stretcher and my girlfriend's with me. She says, Tamara, you'll do, or she said, oh, you should see your cross your heart bra, because they strap you in on your thing. And then I said, you'll do anything for attention. And I'm sure those paramedics are like, who is this person? She didn't need me crying all over her. And then my other girlfriend started just playing, oh, we were going to have steak for supper. And Tamara goes, put it in the blender. And where all the blood was coming from, she got nicked under the chin. So, and chipped a tooth. She was fine. And after they did whatever they had to do with her and that, but we go into that, and that's so true. But you know what mothers don't realize, or fathers who are not in the first responder situations, they go into that mode too. You either panic or you just go. And
fight or flight.
My husband had a heart attack at 43. We moved from Vancouver, British Columbia, to Toronto, Ontario, in March, and August long weekend, he had a heart attack. And it was like, I got to the hospital at 3:00 in the morning. I drove him to the hospital, and I'm just sitting there. I told them what I knew, what was wrong. And later that day, the inspector came, and I had gone home, had a shower, put on makeup and that, and they're all looking at me like this. And I'm thinking, do I need to look like I'm falling apart in front of them? We pull ourselves together there because we have to do it. But 6 months later, I fell apart. They diagnosed fibromyalgia. They said I probably had it. But as soon as he was okay, my body shut down.
Yeah. And that brings us into the burnout. And, I teach my clients all the time. You need to be there. You need to be strong, but you also need to take time for yourself, even in those times when you need to be strong. So if we reflected back on to, and again, like I said earlier, my belief is that a lot of PTSD, I'm not saying that PTSD doesn't happen. We had it, we both had it, you get it. But if you have dealt with, and you're able to deal with the burnout, and you're able to deal with the looking after yourself, then those traumatic incidents can become less. Because you think about after, what are some of the tools that the psychologist gave you to counter and overcome the burnout, the PTSD?
Part of it is meditation, like taking that time. I also learned journaling is huge. I do, in one of my workshops, I do one around forgiveness. There's a book called The Little Soul in the Sun. It's an excerpt from Conversations with God with Neil Donald Walsh. And I read it, and I have my students then write a forgiveness letter, which could be a forgiveness to themselves. Because let's face it, as first responders, as parents, whatever, we take on the guilt of something we think we didn't do. And really, we did the best we could with what we had at the time, right? And we're not taught that this, and I think that should be in any training. They should have people who've been through, like you and I, and say, look, at trauma is going to happen in your life. It's how you deal with it on how we're going to go forward. And to recognize it's going to happen. Here's some tools to deal with it. And really, any of the police forces or anything to do it, to really to say, okay, it's okay to take a break. Because I don't know what it's like with you, but anybody who went off work were frowned upon. They were doing things, you know, it's the stigma. And really interesting. I just I read an article and listened to, it was in the military, and he was in Ireland, Northern Ireland, and they were going to be seconded to I think Afghanistan, but someplace. And his superior said, you're not in the right mindset. And he was paranoid. He said people were following him, and they were, because they were concerned about him. But anyways, long story short, they got him the medical attention that he needed to get through that, went on to have further career in that as a reservist or whatever he was in, a successful career. If we could help them get it sooner, then we wouldn't have all the suicides we're having. Because, and to recognize that, I know you had Michael Geyer on, and his documentary, Wounded Heroes documentary, is, my husband and I sat on the couch and watched it and cried, not because it was horrific, but because it shared so much great information.
That, and it hit home so much. So meditation, journaling, what else did the psychologist, other tools that still stick with you?
To really take time for yourself. I got some really good books. One of the books that really made a difference was The Magic of Thinking Big by David Schwartz. And I think it was written at late 40s or early 50s. It's still an excellent book. She met with me and my husband. Like, it wasn't just me. And I think that's so important. Your spouse, even though Les was a police officer, and he was retired by then, and I'm sure he went through stuff too, because after he retired angry. He was really angry about something, and he just left. He had 28 years service and that. And you know what? You lose your identity. He did for 10 years. I have no doubt that he was depressed just by things. And people have to recognize that, it's fine and dandy to say, oh, I'm going to retire. Do you know what? It's in our blood. Our community, there's so much. And so it was good that she had him come in too, and we could make a plan.
It's funny you say all those things. Those are all the same exact things that I was taught and also learned to overcome the burnout.
I think it starts with burnout. If we're overexhausted, and we've got so much in our head, I think any trauma can lead to the PTS, or whatever, the PTS, whatever they're calling it now, post-traumatic stress. We all can get it. It's how it's dealt with. But I think that, like anything else, for anybody, you're not sleeping enough, you're overtired, you're worried about other people, and you get put on the back burner. And the stigma, right? We don't ask for help. I thought, I don't ever think that I had PTSD. Like, I would never have dreamed that. I thought it was all car accident, even though the memories that were coming up had to do with my job. And it was and I tell you, she was so good. She says, oh, this has nothing to do with your car accidents, everything to do with your job.
Like, when I was going through mine, I was like, PTSD is for military. PTSD is one major traumatic thing. You see somebody get shot, something like that. Come to find out, I had it because again, the burnout, caused it so that it was so much easier for my body to. I wasn't able to. It's not that it was easier for my body for it to happen to me, but it was just more of, I wasn't full enough to be able to actually work through and deal with it.
We're not taught it.
Well, work through and deal with the trauma. I was so drained, like you said, I was so burned out just because I was so hypervigilant. I was so worried about what people were thinking. I was so not taking care of myself. I was looking after everybody else, which isn't a bad thing, but I wasn't taking care of myself on top of that. And so I was getting drained from taking care of everybody else. And in turn, when those traumatic things would happen, which if you're not a law enforcement or first responder, you see, or even as a dispatcher, you hear things that the human mind should not see and hear, not continuously.
When you can't see it, when you can hear screaming in the background and stuff, you build so much. It's like reading a book, right? Or listening to a story. We become it.
Yeah. And you take, for example, and I can only imagine it as a dispatcher. I know a few cops that did dispatching for a little while as well, because we had to do some secondments depending on who you were. And it is because you're as a cop, at least you're like, I can put my foot down harder on the throttle, and I can get there faster and I can make things, but when you're on the phone, you're there and there's nothing you can do besides get other people there. And so it's one of those things. And, if you're not taking care of yourself, that does add up. It builds up and it builds up. And so this is so important about the things that you and I both teach, and we both help. And hopefully in the future, we do some stuff together as well on this.
We really have to collaborate and to recognize, because it is such an isolated, we feel so isolated. And so I'm forever grateful to Brad for recommending you and I connect, because we really is one of my thing for my business is life is a team sport. And when we all work together, miracles happen. And it really is true, right?
It's so true. And this goes to everybody out there listening and watching this. Find your team. I remember when I was in the police force, some of the best times that I had in it was because I had such a good team around me, and I felt like I was, I could say anything. I could talk about the stuff that I was going through. And so in turn, I wasn't as burned out. And, really make sure that you're doing that. So I want to ask you this, Janet. I'm a huge why guy, and I believe that if you have a why that is bigger than anything, it will overpower, especially in first responding. We hear about, and you probably heard it a lot as well from your husband, and also for yourself. The bosses don't care about us. That person didn't get enough. All the negative stuff kind of happens. Whereas when you have a really, really big why, and you recognize actually what your why is, which I've just figured out a thing that it actually stems from your childhood, your why, of why you do everything that you do, and what you do, the things that you're happier with, what line up with your why more, is that you then can overcome all of that negative stuff and actually shift it into positive so much easier. My why, as everybody who, if people are listening, have been listening a lot, my why is I want to create less pain in myself and others, to create the best versions of ourselves. It's always molding the exact nitty gritty of it, but that's my why, to create less pain, in other words. And it stems from watching parents fight, seeing my brother bullied, seeing friends bullied, all of that stuff when I was a kid, pre 7, 8 years old. Also, my dad going off to school, and so I was in pain, didn't want to be in pain anymore, all those things. Now, what would you say, thinking about it in that kind of way, what would you say your why is, why you have done what you've done all along, went into dispatching, now doing what you're doing?
I always go back to you are more than you ever thought you were. And that comes, I'm a high school dropout. Like, I didn't finish high school because I was constantly told I wasn't smart enough. And, it took one person that I started working with when I first joined the force, started working in that relief position. And she said to me, she says, Janet, go back to school. And I says, no, I'm not smart enough. She says, you are interested in so many things. You are smart enough. And so what I say, if I can be one person that can change your life, I want to be that one person. Because I have had teachers, like my grade 5 teacher was great, although I failed reading, and which is interesting enough. I read all the time now, and I'm a published author. And you know what? It's just, I want people's lives to change. They don't have to be what you think. My parents fought too. We moved a lot. I know you guys traveled all over. My dad was a conservation officer. Every 3 years we moved. When I met my husband, he was a security guard. I thought, I'll never move again. 6 months later, joined the RCMP. Guess what? 4 provinces, 9 cities in town, and 15 homes later. So my why is that you can be more than what you think you can, and if I can help you change that, that's who I want to be for you.
That's amazing. So let me ask you this: how is that why? When did you identify that was your why?
Do you know what? I think it wasn't until I think it wasn't until after I trained with Jack Canfield, and I wrote probably my first piece. I wrote a piece called "The Night the Mask Cracked," and that happened. That incident I talk about was in 2003, January 2003. I wrote it in 2011 after my first week of training with Jack Canfield, about the darkness and being in the light. And I wanted to be that one person for somebody.
No, and it is so true. We don't recognize it until after we've gone through something. Now, imagine, let me ask you this: that why, if you had identified or had help identifying that back, say, in the 90s, what would have been different, do you reckon?
Oh, I would have probably raised my kids different. Made a better difference in their life. Just the knowing, I probably would have taken more risks, maybe stepped into who I was more, trusted myself more to do more. I was a risk taker. Like, I did things people would say, you're always doing something. My husband says we'll be married 49 years in another 15 days here.
Oh,
and he's people ask him how come he stayed married this long to me, and he says, because I never know what she's going to do next, so I got to hang around to see what's going to happen next.
That's awesome.
But my life, I think, would have been different. I probably would have maybe been a counselor, maybe been a psychologist, but I don't know whether I would have been as effective without going through what we went through. I think that this has been my training field, and to be who I meant to be. Like,
how do you believe knowing that why would have helped if you'd still gone through everything, obviously, gone down the road and made all those, similar decisions? Obviously you wouldn't have made the same, but similar ones of going, being a dispatcher and doing all of that still. How do you believe having your why would have helped you be a dispatcher, or if you had identified it? Because it was already there. I can guarantee that it was already there. But
yeah, I would never have not acknowledged that was it. Being a dispatcher, and I have to say, and I've thought about this lots of times, because I could never do a desk job. I tried, that doesn't work. I probably would have, as a kid, been diagnosed with ADHD or ADD. But the one thing about being a dispatcher is, one thing, I'm in control. I'm in control of the call. And what other people may not know, I'm in control of that officer on the road too, right? I tell you where to go. But also that nothing's ever the same. Nothing's ever the same. It goes from one thing. And lots of intuition. I think I've always had it. It's honed more and wasn't recognized as much till much later. But having that intuition on when a call will be a bad one, even though it's a calm one.
So Janet, applying your why, though, if you think back to if you knew your why during your dispatching days, if you had identified like you'd have now, and you'd stayed focused.
Do you know what? I think I did to a certain degree, because it was in 1982 that woman made the difference in my life. And
but if you had actually had it at if you had it at the forefront of your brain, do you think it would have made a difference?
It might have. I can't honestly say, because I still had so little self-confidence. It's like you going into police officer mode, right? You put on that uniform and you are here. I put on that headset and I'm here. But out in the rest of the world, I'm nothing. Right? I didn't have the self-confidence. I went back to university as a mature student, and just. But it still was, I still didn't have that in the back of my head. It's still, you're not very smart.
Oh yeah, I get that. People are judging.
And you know what? I think that's still there and that still stops me from stuff. But now I have more tools and I hang around the people that can help me in that. You know, it's choosing the people that we hang around with too, right? If you're hanging around with naysayers, now if somebody, you know, criticizes me, I've got 100 other people that are boosting me up. So why would I hang with them? That's your problem, not mine.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. So if somebody's trying to figure out their why, obviously let's take somebody's you 10, 15 years ago trying to figure out their why, or they want to actually identify because they're like, I want to be like Chris and Janet and I want to grow to that next. How, what, you know, what tools or tricks or tips would you give them?
Do you know what? Take some courses and I wouldn't for finding your why. Simon Sinek, he's amazing at the why, right? Dean Graziosi and Tony Robbins, Jack Canfield. In fact, today I found something. I'm going through a bunch of papers and I found, I guess what would be my why, and I can't remember the exact words right now, that I wrote down in 2011 when I trained with Jack. And so it's, you can still know your why or think you know your why and have it there. It takes a long time for most of us to believe in our why.
Yeah, that's the key. I think that's the biggest key is it's, we can, you know, anybody can help you find your why. It's a matter of what you end up doing with it. You know, it's just like I can train you all the tools that I learned as a cop. You could train me all the tools that you learned as a dispatcher, all of it. It's a matter of what you do with it. It's a matter of the action that you take.
If you don't believe it in you, and it's like anything else. It's working with a psychologist, working with a coach. If you're not coachable, like I won't work with anybody. If you're not ready to shift your life, you're not ready. And let's face it, not everybody is ready, because like even working with a psychologist, I could have so easily gone back because that's a safe place. That's what I know. When you find it, get rid of that pain and get rid of all that other stuff. This is all new land. This is all new stuff. Like I took a voiceover.
It goes from being, all that new stuff goes from being scary to being exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a choice too, right? Be excited about it. And your family in that, I'm fortunate. My family lives far away. And my spouse, like my husband, no matter what crazy idea I come up with, he supports me on it. And so I'm really blessed in that way. But it is scary. It is scary going from what you don't know. There are times, and I saw a shaman one time, and I said, I feel like I'm being pushed to do this work. Don't you feel that sometimes, Chris? Like there's days you don't, I just want to be the ordinary person at home, make me bake bread, cook dinner, whatever. And I feel sorry for myself for a little while. And then I go, oh, well, what's this book? Or who's doing this training? And it's like the shaman said to me, she says, what if you looked at it as being a magnet being drawn to it?
Yep. Because when you're pushing, and this is a key thing, when, you know, around burnout, especially when you're pushing, you'll burn out. When you're being pulled, you will succeed. You'll just be, and it won't feel like an effort. And this is why, you know, we talk about all these tools on every single one of these episodes. We get different tools from different people. You know, a lot of them, if you actually go back and you listen to a lot of them are very similar. And that's because they work. So, you know, like meditation, journaling, you know, having those safe places. For me, motorcycle riding, I have my thing that lights me up, you know, but also the taking care of yourself is the key one. Do things that light you up and take care of yourself so that you can turn up to others and you can actually be there 100%, because then you're being pulled, you're not pushing. If you're pushing.
And a gratitude sheet.
Yeah, gratitude sheets. Every morning I wake up and I tell myself 1 to 3 things I'm grateful for.
I have a gratitude book, and from The Secret, you know, and it's like this big, and it's just but one thing I learned is to write. I write 5 things I'm grateful for today, and the other side, I write 5 things I'm grateful in the future and present tense.
Yeah.
And then it's like, I don't know whether you've ever had the experience in training where they have an elastic.
Yeah.
And you pull the elastic and you can either go this or pull down.
Yeah.
This can draw you up or pull you down. So the journaling helps pull you up.
It's exactly true, you know, and we all have to think about the things, you know, give everything a go. And if you feel like, oh my God, it's pulling me, keep doing it. Yeah. You know, a lot of people find, they go, oh, it's working. Oh yeah, that worked. And then they stop doing it. Keep doing it. Especially in those times where you start to feel drained. Like, you know, I'll take this and I'm going to do a post on it later on my social media. This week, I've been like, why am I feeling drained and doing this new role that I'm doing in insurance? And I'm like, it's because I got some feedback. I didn't like the sound of the feedback because I thought I was doing extremely well. And I pressure myself a lot. But actually, then I looked at it and I was like, why is it that feedback, I identified that it was the feedback. And I was sitting there going, why is it this feedback? What is going on? And so I started talking to my team leader. I started working on myself. Then I had another meeting because they do a lot of feedback training, which is excellent. Yeah. Always have feedback training. And I was in there and one of my team leader's boss was like, you know, oh, we're listening to calls. And he goes, oh, you know, you could have done this and this, blah, blah, blah. And he said, and all of a sudden it clicked. I was like, it's because I know nothing about the industry I'm in. And so I'm feeling dumb and I don't like to feel dumb. And so I was like, as soon as I identified that, then I was able to go, cool. Now that point is the turning point. You either go, oh my God, this sucks, and you run away from it. Or you go, now what do I do with it? How do I get rid of this? How do I change this feeling of feeling dumb? And what do I need to learn? And so I went to my team leader and I was like, I know exactly why I've been feeling weird. He's like, yeah, you seemed a little bit off. I was like, I feel like I'm dumb. And he's like, oh, you're not dumb in that. I was like, no, but I can get people to do stuff. But it's the thing of, I don't know what I'm putting them into.
Yeah.
And now after having that conversation with our boss, I now have more of an insight into what I'm putting them into and the conversation that they're having in the future. So I can have some of that conversation now. And I was like, so I'm good. Sweet. And all of a sudden I was in a great mood.
But don't you, what I really want people to understand, and just like you do, there are people all around us we don't know are there for us. Like, remember I told you that in November, I decided, I woke up with this title in my head and I was going to do a book. I did an anthology. I didn't have any authors. I didn't know what I was doing. I've never done it before. Mm-hmm. But you know what? It went up on Amazon as an ebook June 7th. 20 other authors and myself. I didn't know how to do it, but believe me, like, people came out of the woodwork. I asked somebody if she would edit. She says, I can do this editing, but I think you need her to do this grammar one. I have a friend that's a publisher and she only does this. Yeah, she can work with me. Just people came out of the woodwork and this is, take that step. Just take that step, because you're not going to fall.
And this is where having your why and focusing on your why. If I didn't stay focused on my why of creating less pain for myself, I would have just sat in that pain and stayed with it forever. But because I had identified, I know what my why is. I literally have a post-it on my screen, because the stuff I'm doing at the moment in this intro role isn't stuff that I exactly love. Mm-hmm. It's not the stuff that lights me up all the time. But I put my post-it up there and I go, create opportunities to create less pain. Because insurance creates less pain, because when you're in that thing, like, you think about when you were going through your stuff, imagine if you were able to claim on a big lump sum of money so you didn't have to worry about finances. It creates less pain. And so it's constantly staying focused, constantly working on it, and communicating. And I love to say this to all my clients.
Communicating, definitely.
Be brutally honest. If you're feeling shit and somebody asks you how you're doing, say it. This week, I wasn't so great at it. And I say that and I go, okay, I wasn't so great at it. And I work on it and go, okay, next week I'm going to be. But I did talk to my wife about it and said I wasn't having a great day. And she's like, why? And I was like, just with work, I just feel weird about it. I don't know what it is. I'm trying to put my thumb on it.
Do you know what I tell people? If you're in a bad mood or you're feeling down, set a timer. I don't care if it's an hour, whether it's 15 minutes, but you know what? Feel it. Because I think the worst thing, and this is what I found had happened to me as a dispatcher, I believe, police officer, anybody in that first responder field, in order to do our jobs, we cannot feel.
No.
We cannot be engaged. And so that night that I called the night the mask cracked, what it was is we wear this persona and we push everything down, down, down. and I had pulled all my abdominal muscles, and I couldn't be active and busy to keep it pushed down. And it all came up. And so by setting a timer, you're acknowledging, okay, this is shitty right now, but you know what? I'm going to let that happen. And in 15 minutes, I'll feel better. And I've already told myself that, but it's acknowledging, okay, this is happening right now, but that doesn't mean forever.
No, I think that's a key thing. And it is very, very true for first responders. Anybody really, but first responders see it the most, is that we squash everything away. And that's what happened with me. All my emotions got shoved away. And I'm sure it probably happened the same thing with you. Everything got shoved away because you can't, in the moment, you can't let it come up. The key is you need to let it come up afterwards. You need to have those debriefs. You need to sit with your partner and be like, or with, somebody that you sit close to, or somebody that and be like, holy crap, that job was like, wow, and these are the emotions I felt, not just the black humor, which if you're a first responder, you know what the black humor is.
We have that.
It's fine at the scene to kind of joke a little bit about it within each other. But afterwards, you can't just sit with the black humor, because what it does is it squishes all those emotions away. And when those emotions are squished away, all of a sudden you have no emotions. And so you become this zombie. And this is where I believe very strongly that this is where you end up with cops or first responders that do things that don't actually line up with their integrity.
Because they have it. That's why they went in, and somewhere it got warped. But one thing I just thought of too is I had quit having fun. Like, didn't laugh much anymore, didn't do spontaneous things. It was work and home and work and home. And it was like everything encompassed. Like, we had some shootings, we lost members. It just, the fun went out of life. And I didn't realize it. Even now, some people who don't really know me, they'll say they'd like to see me having more fun. But I do have it, but I can do some crazy stuff. But it's true, I don't have it enough. I don't recognize it enough. And so if you have to schedule it, schedule it. But go back to your childhood. What did you love doing? For me, I love swinging. And I did a Facebook Live on my page. I went out early one morning for a walk and went to a children's playground and went on a swing.
I love to be crazy. I do crazy stuff. Like, literally, I'll just be like, blah, and I'll do like crazy stuff, like in the middle of freaking like anywhere. And I'll do that because it lights you up. And you got to really stay focused on that, especially as I think first responders, but anybody who takes their job really seriously. When you're at work, you can't necessarily always, do silly things. You can probably always find a way. Like, I wear silly socks. The other day I was wearing Deadpool socks at work.
One of my partners up north, he always wore funky socks, and
that's me being fun. And the reason that I bring this up, and I'm glad that you brought this up for people, is that with this, you bring you to the table. Now, necessarily as a cop, you can't always do that, or as a first responder, or whatever your role is, maybe CEO or whatever it is. But outside of that, you can. So make sure that you do it and schedule it. Schedule in having fun. People ask me, they're like, do you not, like, I ride a motorcycle, I ride it every single day to work. Motorway, splitting lanes, straight road, not what a motorcycle is really designed for. And they go, don't you get like annoyed with it and blah, blah, or when it's raining, isn't it nasty and cold? And I was like, no, I get to ride a motorcycle. It lights me up every single time I hop onto it. Doesn't matter if I'm going in a straight line or if I'm going through the twisties. Same exact love.
Oh, my husband was the same when he got his motorcycle, and then he became a trainer. And I think that when we do, when my diagnosis, I was very fortunate to have a really good RCMP doctor. And he said, do something that has nothing to do with work. I took a voiceover course. It was fun.
Yeah. And this is the thing, try new things. So, I'm glad that we went into some more tools for everybody, because they're really, really important, because that's how you overcome, and also more importantly, prevent it.
Yes.
If I could go back and teach my 18-year-old self, my 20-year-old self, some of these things, or 24-year-old self, when I first got into the police force, if I could go back and teach myself and actually listen, it'd be so much better, because I would have prevented all of it from happening. And it's so, so, so important. So if you're listening to this, make sure you implement, at least just grab one thing out of this. So Janet, I know you run your own coaching program. what now?
Now what?
Now what? Sorry, I know it was one of the two ways. Now what? Tell us, tell viewers in that, and we'll put the links and everything in the description below for those that are listening and watching. Tell people how they can get a hold of you if they want to, pick your brain on more stuff or join up with you.
I'm on Instagram and on LinkedIn, and my business is Worldly Connections, because I know people from all over the world. Look at you and I.
Yeah.
And Connections is spelled with a K, CONNAKEKTIONS. And we're just recently rebranded. So my new website isn't up yet, but they can, Janet Wiszowaty, janet.wiszowaty@gmail.com, and just put your, the
Burnout Podcast.
Yeah, Burnout Podcast on. But Facebook finds me too and stuff. So, you know what? I'm here for anybody. Just you want some tools, you want to just talk, we can talk and see what works. We don't all work with everyone, right? But we know people that work well with somebody else. So, giving somebody tools when you're ready, like I was ready. You know what? My husband gave up a lot for me to do some of the training I did. It wasn't cheap, but that's where I am now, and I'm happy where I am.
Yeah. On that cheap side of things, you pay for what you get. I've paid a lot of money myself as well over the last few years to get to where I am. And if I hadn't actually invested in myself, I wouldn't be who I am now. I'm sure you wouldn't be as well, Janet. Janet, last question I have for you before we wrap up. I ask everybody this: what is your top tip to self-happiness?
Live.
I love it.
Live, because
it's very simple.
Lots of people are alive, but they don't actually live.
Just because you're breathing doesn't mean you're actually living. Make sure you live. I love it. Any last words, Janet?
No, I just want people to know that they are more than what they ever dreamed they would be. And that the right people are there. If you take that step, they're there for you. And the risk is worth taking.
I love it. And I also want to mention, I love the artwork behind you. It says, if you're, in case you're just listening, it says, love is the goal, life is the journey.
Yeah.
So remember that. Awesome. Well, guys, this is another episode of Fight the Burnout. Thank you, Janet, for being here with us and sharing your story, sharing your experiences and your tools. Remember, guys, these are here so that you can take, at least one thing away. Just find one thing from this episode and implement it. Key thing, take action on it. My mentor, or, the guy I always look up to, as you guys know, or one of them is Tony Robbins. And he always says, take action. It doesn't matter what you're doing as long as you take action. And so this is something that I want to really reiterate. There's a lot of really good, juicy stuff in this episode. Go back, listen to it again, and just grab one thing, implement it, take action on it, just day after day, work on it. And if you feel you've fallen off of it, just put it back into action. Don't beat yourself up. And if you are looking for assistance, a coach, somebody to actually be there and pretty much hold your hand through the process to get you, up to the place that you want to be, flick us an email at fighttheburnouttpodcast@gmail.com, or send Janet an email if you feel like you resonated with her. A link, her email will be in the description down below. But remember, train hard and test easy, because at the end of the day, we are being tested every day. If we are not training hard, this is something that we've learned as first responders. You train hard because they will probably be training just as hard, because you will be tested, either physically or mentally. You will be tested. It is just a matter of when. So keep training so that when you're tested, it's easy. Until next time, thank you again. Make sure you share this, like, subscribe, send us a comment, send us an email. Let us know what you think. And we love you all.